On the morning of February 16, 2002, the day after Princess Margaret's funeral, Lady Sarah Chatto did not go to Kensington Palace to begin sorting through her mother's belongings. She did not telephone the household. She did not speak to the press. She drove home to her house in Surrey and went into her studio and started a painting she had begun the week before. 3 days later, her grandmother, the Queen Mother, phoned the studio to ask why she had not come to Royal Lodge. Lady Sarah told her she was working. The Queen Mother said the family expected her to be there. Lady Sarah said her work was where she was. It was the first time in 38 years anyone in the family had said no and been allowed to mean it. The account belongs to Anne Glenconner, lady-in-waiting to Princess Margaret from 1971 until Margaret's death. No second source confirms the exchange, but the broader pattern it sits inside is documented in detail, and the pattern is what this story is about. Lady Sarah Frances Elizabeth Armstrong Jones was born at Kensington Palace on the 1st of May, 1964. Her brother David was already 3. Their parents, Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon, and Anthony Armstrong Jones, the first Earl of Snowdon, had married 4 years earlier at Westminster Abbey. They were photographed everywhere. They were the most fashionable couple in London. The marriage was already, by 1964, a quiet difficulty. The apartment was Kensington Palace 1A, the same 20 rooms her cousin, the Prince of Wales, would one day inherit through marriage. In 1964, it was the home Princess Margaret had been given by her sister, the Queen, and Sarah grew up inside it, with a brother who was learning to make things with his hands, and a mother who held court there until very late at night for the writers and decorators and theater people Margaret preferred to courtiers. The household ran on Margaret's hours. The household ran on Margaret's temper. By the time Sarah was 12, her parents had separated. 2 years later, when she was 14, they divorced. The first divorce in the senior royal family since Henry VIII. The press treated it as scandal. The household treated it as inevitability. The daughter, watching from one of the bedrooms in the back of the apartment, treated it as data. By then, she had already begun to draw. That much is in every biographical sketch. What is not so often noticed is how early she was placed at a distance from the center. Bedales School in Hampshire, a coeducational progressive boarding school in Steep, near Petersfield, not a London Royal Day School. The kind of school that did not ring with the titles, the kind of school where art was a subject children took seriously, not a polite accomplishment. A single A-level in art when she left. And then, in the early 1980s, an art school sequence, Camberwell College of Arts in South London, then a printed textiles course at Middlesex Polytechnic, then the Royal Academy Schools in Burlington House on Piccadilly, which built her into a working painter and not into a working royal. By the time her contemporaries in the wider royal family were being assigned charitable patronages and learning the protocols of a state banquet, Lady Sarah was stretching canvases and arguing about palette knives in a London art school studio. Here's the thing about a Windsor childhood in the 1970s. The expectation was set early. 8-word sentences about other people's grief, staff arranged before you arrived, a certain manner of receiving a room, a certain manner of holding a glass. The Glenconner accounts of growing up alongside Margaret, the ones in Lady-in-Waiting, published by Hodder in 2019, describe a household in which the daughter watched and stored and learned. Glenconner has said she wrote that book in her words because she was so fed up with people writing such horrible things about Princess Margaret. But it is not a defensive book. It is a witness's record. And one of the things it records, in passages that have traveled widely since 2019, is what it looked like when Lady Sarah began to choose differently. Glenconner had been lady-in-waiting since 1971. She had watched Margaret's 2 children grow up inside the apartment. She had watched Sarah, in particular, develop the habit of stillness. Margaret was the noise in the room. The Queen Mother, when she came to lunch, was the manner in the room. Sarah was the one against the wall, with the watching face, taking the inventory. The inventory she was taking, by Glenconner's account, was not of objects, it was of behaviors. Which sentences arrived from which mouths, which silences cost the household money, which staff stayed, which staff left. By the time Sarah was 16, she could read a Royal Lodge weekend the way a card player reads a table. This is a video about those choices, not the abstract question of escape, the specific decisions, in order, that broke a specific pattern her mother and grandmother had locked into the family. 6 decisions across roughly 38 years, each one calibrated, each one made quietly. Each one, in its accumulated effect, a refusal. But here's what most people miss when they watch the story from the outside. The first of those decisions is not where you'd expect. Look at how she has been styled in the public record since the day she was born. Lady Sarah Armstrong Jones, and after July 1994, Lady Sarah Chatto. Not Her Royal Highness, not Princess Sarah. The honest reading is that she could not have been styled HRH. The children of an earl are not, by convention, styled with the dignity of a royal prince. There is no recorded offer to elevate her to the higher style. What there is, instead, is the choice the family made, decade after decade, not to seek the elevation. Margaret's children were the Queen's only nephew and niece on her sister's side. Margaret could have campaigned, the Queen could have granted. Neither happened. And Lady Sarah, as she grew, did not press for it either. The status the family did not seek to elevate, she did not seek to claim. The 8-word sentence about her own status in 1980 and in 1990 and in 2020 has remained the same. Lady Sarah, not Princess, not HRH. The same status, the same restraint. That isn't incidental. That is the foundation the rest of the decisions sit on top of. What the palace carefully left out of the public framing of her wedding was this. On the 14th of July 1994, she married Daniel Chatto at St. Stephen's, Walbrook, a small Christopher Wren church in the City of London. The Reverend Chad Vara officiated, the founder of the Samaritans. 200 seats. Children not invited because there was no room for them. No royal carriage, no red carpet, no bells. The dress was by Jasper Conran. The tiara was the Snowdon floral, the one her father had given her mother in 1960. The bridesmaids were her half-sister Frances, her cousin Zara Phillips, and her friend Tara Noble Singh. The reception was at Clarence House, and the couple slipped out without anyone announcing it. The honeymoon was in India, the country where they had first met on a film set in 1983. Daniel Chatto was not the man Margaret would have selected. He was not the man the Queen Mother would have selected. He was the son of an actor and a theatrical agent. Tom Chatto, his father, had died in 1982. Roz Chatto, his mother, had run a theatrical agency in central London. He had been born at the Princess Beatrice Hospital in Richmond on the 22nd of April, 1957, with the formal name Daniel Chatto St. George Sproul. He had read English at New College, Oxford in the 1970s and acted in a string of Merchant Ivory pictures in the 1980s, Quartet, Heat and Dust, The Shooting Party, Little Dorrit, before stepping back from acting and taking a foundation course at the City and Guilds of London Art School and becoming a working landscape painter. He showed at the Cadogan Gallery in 1992. He was, in every sense the family used the word, a working man, a craftsman, not aristocracy, not heir to an estate. The pattern was that royal women in the family married up or married sideways, or were married for utility. Lady Sarah married across, to a painter she had met working in the wardrobe department of a film set in India in 1983, while her father was photographing the country. They had not started dating in 1983, they had started in 1986. The decision was a slow decision, 8 years of it. By the time the engagement was announced in early 1994, the household had already met Daniel many times. That wasn't accidental. That was the second decision. And it was a decision the family quietly made room for. Princess Margaret attended. The Queen attended. The wedding photographs went out, modest by royal standards, almost ordinary in their framing. The household understood, by 1994, that Lady Sarah's choices were going to be made on terms the household did not control. There is one detail in the wedding record that is worth pausing on. The Reverend Chad Vara, who officiated, had founded the Samaritans in 1953, the helpline a generation of people in Britain had rung when they could not see another way through the night. Margaret had supported the Samaritans for years. Lady Sarah's choice of Vara was a thank you that was also a statement. The man who married her was the man who had built the country's most quietly functional emergency service. The man who married her was not a bishop in a mitre, but a working priest in a working parish. The detail was not advertised at the time. The detail is the kind of thing the household notices later. Here's where it gets uncomfortable for the parent generation. The third decision was about geography. After the wedding, the Chattos did not anchor themselves in central London. They did not maintain a permanent Grace and Favour London residence as their primary home. Accounts vary on the exact county. Some report Kensington, some pin her son Samuel's ceramic studio to West Sussex. Daniel's landscape paintings are repeatedly described as Sussex Downs scenes. But the consistent picture across the modern coverage is that the household's center of gravity is outside the palace orbit. Outside the daily commute to Buckingham Palace and Clarence House and Kensington Palace 1A that had been the geographic frame of every previous generation. The country, not London. A studio with windows, not a drawing room with footmen. The same air her mother had grown up complaining about. Too quiet, too provincial, too far from the center, was the air Sarah and Daniel chose for their children. The pattern her mother had locked into the family was the pattern of staying where the lights were. The pattern her grandmother had locked into the family was the pattern of arriving last and leaving first, and never being out of range of a household in waiting. Sarah's third decision broke both at once. She arranged her life so that the household had to come to her, if it wanted her, and it mostly stopped trying. That isn't fabrication. You can see the trace of it in the public record. The years between 1994 and 2002, where she barely appears in the British press except at obvious family events. The years after 2002, where her appearances become rarer still. The years after 2010, where Hello and Tatler started describing her as elusive and rare. She was not elusive. She was working. The fourth decision is the one her audience has been asking about for years: the art career. Not the polite royal patronage of a foundation, not the chairman's seat at a charity. The actual practice. The actual gallery representation. The actual prizes. Camberwell in the 1980s. The Royal Academy Schools. The Windsor and Newton Prize in 1988. The Creswick Landscape Prize in 1990. A solo exhibition at Cadogan Contemporary, the Chelsea Gallery, also in 1990, where her paintings hung under the name Sarah Armstrong Jones. The auction house lot descriptions from those years describe her work as abstract landscapes in oil, careful, layered, atmospheric. The provenance label on a 1990 oil on board from that show, sold at Hanson's more than a generation later, still reads exactly as it was printed at the time of the exhibition. Cadogan Contemporary Gallery, London. Exhibition of the works of Sarah Armstrong Jones, 1990. The piece of cardboard glued to the back of a 30 by 30 centimeter painting is, in its own small way, evidence. From 1995 onward, she has exhibited at the Redfern Gallery in Cork Street, and she still does. The Redfern has been a serious London gallery since 1923. She is described on its own pages as an in-house painter. The novelist Sebastian Faulks wrote the introduction to her 2009 catalogue. She still works under her maiden name, professionally, more than 3 decades after marriage. The name on the painting is not Chatto. It is Armstrong Jones. The painter, when she signs, is the artist she has been since she was 24 years old. The pattern is that royal women in this family have been patrons of the arts. Princess Margaret took ballet seriously. The Queen Mother collected. Princess Alexandra served boards. But the women in this family had not, since Princess Louise in the 19th century had a serious working artistic life in their own right. Paint on canvas, gallery on Cork Street, sales recorded at auction. Lady Sarah is the first Windsor of her generation for whom the working title, landscape painter, exhibited at Redfern, is not a courtesy. It's the job. The same job, at the same gallery, for 30 consecutive years. Here's the thing about a job in this family. The thing that's hard to say without sounding therapy-trained, but which her decisions point to anyway. A job is what no one in the previous 2 generations of women on this side of the family had been allowed to have. A job is an answer to a phone call. A job is somewhere to be at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. A job is a reason to say no. By the time she was 40, she had been saying no for a decade and a half. By the time she was 50, she had a body of work in the public record. By the time she was 60, in 2024, the Royal Ballet School announced that she would succeed her cousin the King as president, succeeding King Charles, who had held the patronage since 1998. The announcement was made in June. Her own statement, modest as the wedding had been. It was the first major public role she had taken, and she had taken it in her own time, on her own terms, after 30 years of saying no. But that wasn't all. The 5th decision is the one the public never sees, because by design, it leaves no public trace. Staff. The pattern in her mother's household had been staff, a private secretary, a butler, a dresser, ladies-in-waiting on rotation, a press secretary. The pattern in her grandmother's household had been staff to the point of legend. At Clarence House, in the William Tallon era, the household ran to dozens. Pages, footmen, the butler at the top of the stairs, the chef who knew when the gin needed to arrive on a small tray with no announcement. The Queen Mother had run that household for 50 years. Princess Margaret had run a smaller version of it at Kensington Palace 1A, but the principle was the same. Staff arranged the day, staff dressed the room, staff dialed the telephone. The household existed inside a layer of human apparatus that translated between the royal woman and the world. Lady Sarah, on the public record, does not appear to maintain a private secretary in the working royal sense. There is no Lady Sarah Chatto press office. There are no formal ladies-in-waiting on her name. The patronages she does hold: Vice President of the Royal Drawing School, patron of the Frederick Ashton Foundation, until 2024 Vice President and now President of the Royal Ballet School, are run with the apparatus those institutions provide, not the apparatus a private household would. What that means in practice is that she is responsible for her own diary. She is responsible for her own correspondence. She drives herself, on most accounts, to the rural studio. The Glenconner-era infrastructure, The staff that surround a princess, the staff that surround a queen's daughter, the staff that surround a queen mother, has been deliberately not assembled around her. The household she runs is, by Windsor standards, almost provincial. By her mother's standards, almost shockingly so. Margaret would not have known how to send her own thank you letter. Lady Sarah, by every available reading, sends her own. She didn't order. She didn't demand. She arranged her own life so that the work could be done by her, and the asking would have to come to her, not through 3 intermediaries. The pattern holds. The 6th decision is the one the brief points to, and the one the public can verify. The funeral in February 2002. The Queen Mother's funeral in April 2002. The funerals of her cousins. The state funeral of her aunt Queen Elizabeth in September 2022. The coronation of her cousin King Charles in May 2023. Across 2 decades of obligation, Lady Sarah's pattern at these events has been the same. She attends. She does not, on the record, take a ceremonial role. She did not read a lesson at her mother's funeral, although she was at the bedside the morning Margaret died on the 9th of February, 2002. She did not give an interview on her grandmother's death 7 weeks later, although the Queen Mother had asked her to come to Royal Lodge. She did not, in 2022, deliver any of the personal recollection broadcasts that her cousins put their names to. At the coronation on the 6th of May 2023, she was photographed in a yellow Jasper Conran dress and a Stephen Jones hat. She was a guest at her own cousin's coronation. She did not process. She did not carry a regalia. She did not speak. She wore yellow. She sat in the abbey. She went home. That is the strategic invisibility the brief names. It is not absence. It is presence without performance. The thing the household had been trained to expect, the daughter in the front row, dressed for the cameras, ready to deliver the formal sentence about other people's grief, she had been declining, one occasion at a time, since 1994. The decline was never combative. It was simply not what she had agreed to. She had agreed to be Lady Sarah Chatto, painter, not Princess Sarah, working royal, and the household, after 30 years, had stopped asking her to be the second. The asking between 1994 and 2023 simply faded out. Nobody could remember exactly when it had stopped. There had been no scene. There had been no statement. The household had just, sentence by sentence and invitation by invitation, recalibrated its expectations downward until they matched the size of the life Lady Sarah was already living. By the time she died in 2002, Princess Margaret had outlived most of the people who would have understood what her daughter had done. The Queen Mother went 7 weeks later, on the 30th of March, 2002, aged 101, at Royal Lodge, Windsor. The 2 funerals, Margaret on the 15th of February, the Queen Mother on the 9th of April, ran together in the public mind. The infrastructure of expectation that had shaped Sarah's childhood was, by Easter 2002, gone. The chairs in the upstairs sitting room at Clarence House, the lunch table at Royal Lodge, the way Margaret used to telephone in the late morning to test the daughter's diary against her own, all of it dismantled in 7 weeks by 2 strokes and a peaceful death. Her cousins remained. Her aunt remained until September 2022. Her brother remained. David, Lord Linley, then 2nd Earl of Snowdon, with his furniture company that he had opened in Dorking in 1985 and grown into a name on Pimlico Road. David had inherited a different fraction of the family pattern. He had built a working firm. He had also built 3 houses: Chelsea, Daylesford, the Château d'Auteuil in the Luberon. His marriage to Serena Stanhope had separated in February 2020 and progressed to divorce. He had taken the title. taken the inherited orbit and worked inside it. He had not refused the pattern. He had renovated it. He had kept the auction house contacts, the Pimlico Road premises, the title on the door. The work was real, but the work was inside the existing architecture. His sister had walked out of the architecture entirely. The contrast with her cousin, Princess Eugenie, is sharper still. Eugenie is 12 years younger than Sarah. She works as a director at the Hauser and Wirth Contemporary Art Gallery, which is a serious commercial gallery on the international circuit, and her sister Beatrice works at a software company. They have, in their own register, also taken jobs, but they have done it as HRH. They have kept the style. They have stayed inside the public-facing apparatus of the family. Eugenie's wedding in October 2018 was at Windsor, televised. Beatrice's wedding in July 2020 was at the Royal Lodge Chapel, with the Queen Mother's lace from 1947. They have rotated inside the same circuit Sarah stepped out of. They have done it gracefully. They have done it humanely. But they have done it inside the same room, with the same staff, on the same payroll, under the same expectation. And here's the thing about an expectation in a family this old. An expectation is not a person. An expectation is a piece of furniture. Once a generation, somebody has to sit in it, or it dies. Margaret had sat in it. The Queen Mother had sat in it before her. The chair was being kept warm for Sarah. The chair has been empty since 1994. What the family pattern had been waiting for Lady Sarah to inherit was a specific posture. The Queen Mother's chair at Royal Lodge, the 8-word sentences about other people's grief, the staff, the manner, the way of receiving a room. The expectation that, when something terrible happened to another family in the country, she would be the one to step forward and deliver the appropriate phrase, the way her grandmother had done at the Aberfan disaster in 1966, the way her grandmother had been trained by the war years to do, perfectly, professionally, without flinching, and without quite meaning it. Lady Sarah had watched her grandmother do that for the first 38 years of her life. She had watched her mother do it less convincingly for the same period. She had drawn her own conclusion early. The conclusion was that the 8-word sentence was the cost of admission to the chair, and the chair was the cost of the staff, and the staff were the cost of the household, and the household was the cost of the manor, and the manor was the cost of becoming the kind of woman the family had been making, generation after generation, since before she was born. She had simply, decision by decision, opted out of the bargain. Not loudly, not in interviews, not in a memoir of her own. By taking the smaller title, by marrying the painter, by raising her sons outside the palace orbit, by signing her paintings Sarah Armstrong Jones, by running a household without the infrastructure, and by attending the funerals and the coronations as a guest and not as a performer. If you suspected, watching the last 3 decades of the Windsor family at work, that one of Margaret's 2 children seemed to be doing something different, you weren't imagining things. You were right. You were right the whole time. The story of the Windsor women in the late 20th century had been written, mostly, about the ones who could not get out. The one who got out was the one the cameras stopped covering somewhere around 1995 and never quite picked up again. The pattern her mother and grandmother had locked into the family was learnable. It was not biology. It was a set of behaviors, transmitted across decades, that one person could decline, in slow motion, if she was patient enough and the rest of the family was tired enough to let her. Margaret's daughter was patient enough. The rest of the family, after 1994, was tired enough. And the gap between what the household expected and what Lady Sarah actually did, that gap, 3 decades wide now, is the real proof of the thesis that the Queen Mother to Margaret pattern was never a curse. It was a script. And scripts can be put down. Lady Sarah Chatto, in 2026, is 61 years old. She lives in Surrey. She paints most weekdays. Her two sons, Samuel and Arthur, have not, as adults, used the Windsor surname at any point in their public lives. The Queen Mother's chair, the one her mother sat in, the one her grandmother sat in, was not in her studio. It still isn't. The thing the family had been waiting for her to inherit. The chair, the staff, the manner, the 8-word sentences about other people's grief. She had not, after 38 years and counting, ever once sat down to receive.